She had just crossed the finish line at the Paris Olympics with a bronze medal around her neck and a world-class time on the board. She had just competed against the fastest women alive on the biggest track in the world and held her own with the kind of calm that only comes from years of doing hard things under pressure. She had 3 Olympic medals. She held 8 track records from her college days. She had a degree from one of the most selective universities on the planet. And a stranger on the internet typed, "There's no way a black woman actually graduated from Harvard." Not one stranger. Thousands of them, piling on top of each other in the comment section of a photo she posted just to have a nice evening. A simple photo from a WNBA game, her smiling in the stands, living her life. Thousands of comments, most of them saying the same thing, in different arrangements of the same ugly words. The degree was fake. The admission was a quota. She got in because of affirmative action and didn't actually learn anything. Black women don't belong at Harvard. Never did. What happened next is what this story is really about. Because Gabby Thomas didn't go quiet. She didn't delete the photo. She didn't log off and wait for the storm to pass the way a lot of people would have. She sat down. She wrote back. And what she wrote made 4 million people stop scrolling. To understand why that moment hit the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the Olympics, not the finish line. Further back than that, back to a girl in Atlanta, Georgia, who grew up watching her mother work double shifts and still somehow find time to sit at the kitchen table and help with homework. Back to a kid who loved 2 things equally and was told, more than once, that she would eventually have to choose between them. Gabby Thomas was born on December 7, 1996, in Atlanta. Her mother, Jennifer, was a public health professional. Her father, Wirt, worked in education. The house she grew up in was not wealthy, but it was full of something you can't buy: expectation. The good kind. The kind where the people who love you look at you like you're already everything they know you're going to be, and all you have to do is grow into it. She was fast from the beginning, not in the manufactured way that some athletes are fast, the ones who are drilled and sculpted by coaches from the age of 5. Gabby was fast the way some people just are, the way birds don't think about flying. She would run in the backyard, and her mother would watch from the kitchen window with a look on her face that mixed ordinary parental pride with something else, something closer to wonder. This child is unusual. Even Jennifer knew it early. But Gabby also read, constantly. She read the way some kids play video games for hours at a time, fully absorbed, barely noticing the world going on around her. She was curious about everything, but science in particular grabbed her the way sprinting grabbed her. Both had the same quality. They were honest, the numbers didn't lie, the data didn't flatter you. You either ran the time or you didn't. The results either supported your hypothesis or they didn't. There was something clean about that to Gabby, something trustworthy. By the time she was in high school at Northfield Mount Hermon in Massachusetts, a boarding school that took her far from Atlanta but also gave her access to resources and coaching, her home school couldn't match. She was already one of the fastest young female sprinters in the country. Her 200-meter times were attracting attention from college programs across the nation. At the same time, she was pulling A's in biology and chemistry and asking her science teachers questions that took them a beat longer to answer than they expected. The coaches who came calling wanted her for one thing. The schools she was looking at academically wanted her for another. And then there was Harvard. Harvard wanted both. Harvard Track and Field reached out through the normal channels, the letters and visits and carefully worded conversations that are the currency of college recruiting. But what made Gabby listen more closely wasn't the sales pitch about the athletics program. It was the moment she sat in a science classroom on that campus and realized, I could actually study here. Not just attend, study. The way she wanted to study, with real rigour, with faculty who were leading researchers in their fields, with a library that had more books than she could read in a lifetime. She enrolled in 2015. She was 18 years old. She was going to run for Harvard and major in neurobiology and global health. Both of those things at the same time, all the way through. Let me just say that combination alone. Neurobiology and global health at Harvard. While being a Division I college athlete, that's not a casual course load. That is a schedule that most people would look at and quietly decline. The first year was a test she hadn't quite studied for. Not academically and not athletically, she managed both at a high level almost from the start. The test was internal. It was a slow accumulation of moments in which she was the only person in the room who looked like her. Not always, but often enough that it had a weight. Office hours where professors would talk over her head to the students sitting beside her. Team dinners where conversations naturally sorted themselves into clusters she wasn't pulled into. The small, low-grade friction of moving through a space that wasn't designed with you in mind. None of this broke her, but it shaped her. It made her more deliberate about why she was there, what she was doing, what it meant. It also made her more attuned to the students around her who were carrying the same weight in silence. She became the person who noticed, who checked in, who asked the question that needed asking even when the room would have been more comfortable if no one asked it. On the track, she was dominant from the start. She broke Harvard records. She qualified for NCAA championships. She ran times that turned heads at meets where Harvard women's track was not supposed to be turning heads. Her coaches called her coachable in the specific way that is the highest compliment in athletics. It means the athlete hears what you say, integrates it, and executes it faster than you expected them to. She wasn't just talented. She was disciplined. By the time she graduated in May 2019, she had broken 8 program records. She had completed her neurobiology and global health degree. She had also been accepted into a graduate program in epidemiology at the University of Texas at Austin because she wasn't done learning. She was never done learning. And then, the following summer, in the strange, suspended, pandemic-altered world of 2020 and 2021, Gabby Thomas became one of the fastest women alive. The 2020 Tokyo Olympics, held in 2021 due to the pandemic, were unlike any games in history. No crowds in the stands, an emptiness in the arenas that felt almost surreal, like running inside a dream. But the competition was real. The fastest women in the world were there, and they were running. 61 seconds in her semi-final heat. At the time, that made her the second fastest woman ever at that distance in recorded history. Read that again slowly. The second fastest in recorded history. She was 24 years old. And she had just done something only one woman in the history of the sport had ever done faster. She finished the final with a bronze medal. The crowd that wasn't there didn't get to roar, but the world watching on screens saw it, and those who knew sprint history understood the weight of that number, 61. It doesn't look like much when you write it down, but in the world of women's sprinting, that number is a cathedral. 3 years later, in Paris, she added more medals. She stood on the podium again, with the tricolour lights of a French summer above her, and that particular expression on her face, the one that is equal parts exhaustion and serenity, the face of someone who has run as hard as they can and left nothing on the track. She had, by the summer of 2024, built a resume that should have settled every question about who she was and what she was capable of. It didn't settle anything. The photo she posted in January 2025 was quiet. That's the thing that makes what happened next so striking. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a flexing moment. It was a woman at a basketball game, sitting in the stands wearing a comfortable jacket, smiling because she was having a nice time. The Indiana Fever were playing. Caitlin Clark was on the court. Gabby was in the audience, off duty. Just a person watching sports and enjoying herself. She posted it to her Instagram with a simple caption. Something like, being a fan of the game, nothing incendiary, nothing designed to provoke. Within hours, the comments section had turned into something else entirely. It started with the usual friction that comes when a black woman is visible online. The baseline level of hostility that women who look like Gabby navigate every time they post anything, the taxes on existing out loud that most people never have to pay. But then it sharpened into something specific. Someone wrote, "Didn't she claim to go to Harvard?" Someone else piled on. And then more. And then hundreds. And then thousands, each one adding another variation of the same claim, the same disbelief, the same flat refusal to accept that a black woman could have earned both an Olympic podium and a Harvard diploma without some corner being cut, some door being propped open by something other than her own capacity. The comments said she got in because of her sport, not her grades. They said affirmative action handed her a degree she didn't earn. They said no black woman who actually studied neurobiology could stand in the same room with real Harvard students. They said she probably didn't attend a single class. They said things that were blunter and uglier and that I won't repeat here, but that anyone who spends time on the internet can picture clearly enough. What I keep thinking about is what it feels like to be on the other side of that. To be a person who has given 10 years of your life to two of the hardest things you can do simultaneously, elite athletic competition and rigorous academic study, and to have that work denied, not because anyone examined it and found it lacking, but simply because of what you look like. Because of a prejudice that was already locked in before a single fact was checked. That is a particular kind of exhaustion. Not the tiredness of effort, but the tiredness of never being believed. Gabby Thomas was quiet on the platform for a while. Not absent, not invisible, but quiet. The way a person goes quiet when they're deciding whether to respond or let it move through them. She responded. The post she wrote, and it wasn't a clip, it wasn't a video, it was written in full sentences. The way someone writes when they have something real to say began simply, she said she had noticed the comments. She said she wasn't going to pretend they didn't exist, because pretending things that are real don't exist is one of the ways things stay real longer than they should. Then she named it, directly, without softening the word or wrapping it in qualifiers. She called it racism. Not implicit bias, not ignorance. Racism. The belief, she wrote, that a black woman's achievements require a different level of proof than anyone else's, that the bar stays higher for us no matter how many times we clear it, that the degree on the wall is suspect, that the medal around the neck might have an asterisk, that we are always one accusation away from having to start over and prove ourselves again. She described her time at Harvard. Not defensively, she wasn't performing humility or proving a point by listing every grade. She wrote about what the place meant to her, the specific professor who pushed back on a paper she thought was finished and made her see how much further she could take it. The section of the library where she studied on winter nights when it was dark by 4 in the afternoon and the windows were fogged. The moment during her neurobiology thesis work when two pieces of data clicked together and she understood something she hadn't understood before, and the feeling of that, which she said was not entirely different from the feeling of crossing a finish line. She talked about what it meant to be a black student at Harvard, to walk into spaces where people read her as an athlete before a scholar, to have classmates ask with genuine curiosity which sport she played before asking what she was studying. She talked about it without bitterness, but with precision. She named it not to wound anyone, but to describe the reality of the terrain she navigated every day for 4 years. And then she talked about the Olympics. She talked about the training, the sacrifice, the years of early mornings and late evenings. the specific physical labor of becoming one of the fastest human beings on the planet and maintaining that level while also maintaining a full academic load. She talked about what it cost and who it required her to be. She said that when she crossed the line in Tokyo and saw that number, she did not feel victorious in the way people imagine athletes feel victorious. She felt, she wrote, something quieter, a kind of confirmation, like the work had kept its promise. Then she addressed the commenters directly, not with anger, though she had every right to anger. She addressed them with a clarity that was somehow more cutting than anger. She said, "I know you won't believe this. I know that for some of you, no amount of evidence will move the needle because this isn't actually about my degree or my credentials or my times. This is about the story you've already told yourself, about who is allowed to be excellent, and where, and how, and I am not a character in that story. But I am going to tell mine anyway, because somewhere out there is a young black girl who is deciding right now whether her dreams are permitted. And I am talking to her." That line, the last one, was the one that broke through. 4 million people interacted with that post within 48 hours. The comment section inverted. The people who had come to deny and dismiss were still there, but they were now buried under an avalanche of people who came to see something different. A woman standing fully in her truth, not begging to be believed, not shrinking, not softening, just standing. Athletes from across disciplines posted their own responses. Scholars and professors weighed in. Former Harvard classmates of Gabby's shared memories, specific ones, the kind that could only come from people who were actually there, studying together, eating together, celebrating test scores together. A biology professor who had taught her sent a short message that someone screenshotted and shared. "She was one of the most genuinely curious students I've had in 2 decades of teaching. Not the best student in the sense of grades, though those were excellent too. Curious, in a way that made the whole room sharper when she was in it." A retired track and field coach who had seen her run posted a breakdown of her splits from the 2021 semi-final with a single sentence at the end. "Numbers don't lie, and these ones don't need defending." But here's the part of the story that most people didn't see, the part that happened away from the cameras and the comment sections and the 4 million interactions. Because this story has another layer, and it's the one that matters most to understand. 2 weeks after Gabby posted that response, she got a message. It came through official channels, the kind of message that doesn't arrive in a public inbox, that gets routed through management and agents and lands with a weight that makes people pause before opening it. It was from a woman named Dr. Miriam Okeke. She was a 68-year-old Nigerian-American public health researcher. She had spent 40 years working in global health, specifically in the area of disease surveillance in sub-Saharan Africa. She had been, at various points in her career, a faculty member at Johns Hopkins, a World Health Organization consultant, and the architect of a disease monitoring framework used in 7 countries. She was not famous. She did not have a social media presence. She was the kind of person who would shape the world in ways that would only become visible if you traced certain outcomes backward far enough to find her hands in them. Dr. Okeke had seen Gabby's post. She had read it 3 times. But she had written to Gabby for a specific reason. She was in the process of launching an initiative, a fellowship program designed to place young black women with backgrounds in science into 1-year research positions embedded with global health organizations in Africa and the Caribbean. The goal was twofold: to generate research on health outcomes in underserved communities and to create a pipeline of black women who would go on to lead in global health institutions. The program had funding, it had institutional partners, it had everything it needed except one thing. It needed a face. Not a celebrity face, not a brand ambassador. It needed someone with credibility in both worlds, the athletic world, where millions of young black girls looked for models of what was possible, and the scientific world, where the research would carry weight. Someone who could stand in a room with WHO officials and command attention, and then stand in a room with a 16-year-old in Atlanta and make her believe that she belonged in that first room too. Dr. OKK had been looking for months. And then she read a post by an Olympic sprinter who talked about a biology thesis and the feeling of data clicking into place, and she knew she had found her. The meeting happened at a hotel in New York City. A neutral place, neither of their worlds, just a quiet room with a good table and afternoon light coming in through tall windows. Dr. Okeke arrived first. She was a small woman, compact and precise in her movements, with close-cropped grey hair and reading glasses on a thin chain around her neck. She ordered tea. She arranged her notes on the table. She was the kind of person who was always the most prepared person in the room, not because she needed to prove it, but because that was simply how she moved through the world. Gabby arrived in a grey sweatshirt. No entourage, no assistant, just herself, and a notebook she carried in a tote bag that also had a half-eaten granola bar in it because she had come straight from a workout. She was taller than Dr. Okeke expected. Athletes always are. She sat down, and the first thing she said was not a pleasantry. She said, "Tell me about the framework, the surveillance model." Dr. Okeke set down her tea. She looked at this young woman across the table. Gabby shrugged. They talked for 3 hours. The tea went cold. The granola bar was forgotten. Dr. Okeke talked about the research gaps, the specific communities where health data was thin or non-existent, the ways that absence of data translated directly into absence of resources and absence of care. She talked about the political complexity of working in nations with fragile health infrastructure and the necessity of having researchers who were not just technically competent but culturally fluent. She talked about what the fellowship would do and who it was for. Gabby listened with the same quality of attention she brought to studying race film before a competition. Full absorption. Occasionally, she asked questions, not performative questions meant to demonstrate engagement, but the kind of questions that reveal what the listener has actually been thinking. At one point she said, "The data gap in the Caribbean, is that also partly a language access problem?" Dr. Okeke paused. "That's exactly right. I speak some French," Gabby said. "Not fluently." Dr. Okeke wrote something in her notes. The conversation turned to the public-facing role. Dr. Okeke was direct about what she needed. She needed Gabby's name and face and story to open doors that the fellowship program couldn't open on its own, to reach the girls who needed to see someone like themselves in this work, to appear at fundraising events and in media coverage and in schools, in communities where the pipeline needed to start. She was honest that this was a significant ask of someone's time and energy, and that it would coexist with Gabby's ongoing athletic career and whatever personal life she was trying to protect. Gabby was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. Then she looked back at Dr. Okeke. She asked, "Why can't it be embedded, like, I'm not just the spokesperson? I'm actually in the research. I'm in the field." A pause. "I still have my epidemiology background." The room was quiet.
I want to stop right here for 1 second, because that right there, that impulse to not just represent, but to actually do the work, that is who Gabby Thomas is. Not the version the internet wanted to argue about.
"Not the symbol, the actual person," Dr. Okeke said yes. The program launched publicly 6 months later. It was called the Clear Track Initiative, a name chosen deliberately with a double meaning that anyone who had read Gabby's post would recognize immediately. A clear track in athletics means the lane ahead of you is open, no obstacles, no interference. And a clear track in science means a methodology with integrity, clean data, honest results. The name was Gabby's suggestion. She offered it in a follow-up email the week after the New York meeting, in a paragraph that also contained 4 research questions she had been thinking about since the conversation. The program accepted its inaugural cohort of 12 fellows, 12 young black women with science backgrounds selected from hundreds of applicants across the country. They ranged from undergraduate seniors to early career professionals. They came from Atlanta and Detroit and Baltimore and New Orleans and Miami and places between. Some of them had grown up watching Gabby run. Some of them had written her name on vision boards. None of them knew, when they applied, that she would be more than a figurehead. She was more than a figurehead. Gabby flew to Lagos with the first cohort for their initial field orientation. She was there not to wave from a stage, but to sit in the same seminars, to navigate the same logistical confusion of arriving in a new city with new protocols and new partners who needed to trust you before they would share their data. She ran in the mornings on roads that were unlike any track she had trained on, sometimes with local runners who recognized her, and sometimes alone, in the quiet before the city fully woke up. In the evenings, she sat with the fellows, and they talked not just about the research, but about all the other things that a room full of young black women scientists has to talk about. The imposter syndrome that doesn't fully disappear even when you've earned everything you have. The loneliness of being the only one. The exhaustion of the proof cycle, having to prove yourself again and again in every new room to every new person, as if nothing you've already done is transferable evidence. One of the fellows, a 3-year-old from Baltimore named Destiny, who had a double major in biochemistry and statistics, said something one evening that the group held for a long time afterward. They were on a rooftop in Lagos. Warm air, city sounds below them. Someone had found bottled water and someone else had found plantain chips. Destiny said, "I spent so much energy in college convincing myself I deserved to be there. Not even convincing other people, convincing myself." Gabby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." She paused. "I think part of why we have to do this work publicly, not just here, but all of it. The part where we tell our stories even when it's uncomfortable is so that the next generation doesn't have to spend that energy on that question anymore." Destiny looked at her. Gabby looked out over the city. "I don't know yet. I think it's cumulative." She smiled slightly. The first year of the Clear Track initiative generated research contributions from all 12 fellows that were integrated into the surveillance framework Dr. Okeke's team was refining. 3 fellows had their names on co-authored papers submitted to peer-reviewed journals by the end of the year. 2 were offered extended positions with their host organizations. 1 received an offer to present findings at a WHO regional conference, which she accepted standing at a podium in Geneva in a blazer she bought specifically for the occasion, reading from notes she had rehearsed 40 times. Gabby was in the audience for that presentation. She wore a grey blazer and sat in the 3rd row and clapped with the whole room when it ended, and nobody in that room knew who she was, and that was exactly right. The media coverage of the initiative, when it came, focused initially, as media often does, on Gabby's name and face and Olympic record. The sprinter turned public health advocate, the Harvard graduate using her platform. The headlines wrote themselves in a particular direction, but the coverage shifted over time. The way coverage of something real eventually shifts when the journalists spend enough time with it. The story that emerged was messier and more interesting than the simple athlete with a cause narrative. It was a story about a fellowship program that was quietly and methodically training the next generation of black women in global health research. It was a story about Dr. Miriam Okeke, who had spent 4 decades building towards something like this and finally had the conditions to make it real. It was a story about 12 women in Lagos and 12 more in Bridgetown and 12 more in Accra, doing research that would shape health policy in communities that had been waiting for someone to look carefully at their data. Gabby was in every chapter of that story, not at the centre of it, but woven through it. She ran in Paris in the summer of 2024 as all of this was already in motion. She stood on the podium in the French summer light. She went back to training afterward, the way athletes do, because the work is never finished, and the next meet is always 6 weeks away. She still posted on Instagram occasionally, still showed up at WNBA games and baseball games and the other ordinary pleasures of a person living a life. She was still the person who would get on a plane to Lagos for a research orientation, and still the person who ran sub-22 seconds on a track in front of thousands of people, and still the person who sat in the back of a Lagos classroom with a notebook and an epidemiology question she hadn't answered yet. And then, January 2025, the photo at the WNBA game, the comment section, the thousands of people who refused to believe she was who she was, and the post that reached 4 million people and said, among other things, somewhere out there is a young black girl deciding right now whether her dreams are permitted, and I am talking to her. Here is what happened after the post that didn't make the 4 million interactions. Dr. Okeke forwarded it to her graduate students. The fellows in the current cohort sent it to each other in a group message at midnight. Destiny, the one from Baltimore, posted it on her own page and wrote underneath, "This woman flew to Lagos with us, sat in our meetings, asked the hard questions, ate plantain chips on a rooftop with us, and talked about what we were carrying. She did not do it for a press release." That post got 600,000 interactions. It had a different feeling from the original, tighter, more specific, the kind of endorsement that comes from someone who was actually there and is not performing anything. A 6-year-old girl in Atlanta named Jordan, who ran track at her high school and had been accepted on a partial scholarship to a university with a strong biology program, but was quietly terrified that she wasn't smart enough to last there, found Destiny's post at 0 inches the morning. She read it twice. She read Gabby's original post twice. She lay in the dark for a while. Then she wrote down the name of the fellowship program in the Notes app on her phone, next to the scholarship information she'd been staring at for weeks. She had not yet decided whether to accept the scholarship. She had been telling herself she needed more time to think. But what she was really doing was waiting for something she could not have named, until that moment, some sign that someone like her had walked the path she was looking at and come out the other side, not just intact, but expanded, not just educated, but used their education for something real, not just fast, but deep. She accepted the scholarship the next morning. I'm telling you about Jordan because the story doesn't end with Gabby. It ripples forward the way all the real stories do. Irene Wilson's story rippled into a community kitchen and a playground and 2 college scholarships. Wanda Moore's story rippled into a self-defense class with 43 women in white gis on a cracked gymnasium floor. Celeste Ingram's story rippled into a doctoral program, and every girl in Anacostia who was watching from a distance. Gabby Thomas's story ripples into the Jordan who writes down the name of a fellowship at 0 inches the morning, and into the Jordan who eventually does the fellowship 10 years from now and sits on a rooftop somewhere and talks with 12 other young women about the energy they lost to self-doubt and the energy they got back when someone told the truth out loud. What the trolls in that comment section couldn't see, what the disbelief and the denial couldn't reach, was that the story was already so much larger than a diploma. The diploma was real Harvard, neurobiology and global health, 2019. Her name on the paper, her hands on the work. That part was never in question, not really, not to anyone who looked. But the diploma was also, by January 2025, the smallest item on the list of what Gabby Thomas had built. 3 Olympic medals, 8 program records, an epidemiology graduate program, a global health fellowship initiative with 36 fellows and counting, a post that reached 4 million people and said the thing that needed saying, a 6-year-old in Atlanta who accepted a scholarship because she finally understood something about what was possible. None of that required anyone's permission. None of it waited for the comment section to decide it was real. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what the core of it is, what the thing is underneath the medals and the degree and the research and the viral post. And I keep coming back to the same word, refusal. Not refusal in the sense of resistance or antagonism. Gabby Thomas isn't built on anger. And if you read that post carefully, that's clear. Refusal in the sense of simply declining to accept someone else's story about who you are. Declining to live inside a smaller version of your life because other people find the full version inconvenient to believe. She refused, as a student, to be just an athlete in a classroom. She refused, as an athlete, to be just a body on a track. She refused, as a public figure, to be just a face on a campaign. She refused, when the comment section demanded she shrink, to shrink. And she refused, in that post, to let the moment pass without saying something true. Not for herself, she's already Gabby Thomas. She doesn't need 4 million people to validate her degree. She said it for the girl in Atlanta at 0 inches the morning, with a notes app open and a decision she hasn't made yet. That kind of refusal takes something that isn't taught in any university and isn't measured in any race. It's the thing you build slowly, out of thousands of early mornings and late nights, and moments in classrooms where you were the only one, and moments in comment sections where the noise was overwhelming. It's built from watching people who look like you stand up when standing up costs something, and deciding that you will do the same when your moment comes. Her moment came in January 2025, in the comments section of a photo from a basketball game. She stood up, she didn't shout, she didn't perform, she just told the truth, in full sentences, about who she was and what she had done and who she was doing it for. And the truth, as it turns out, was loud enough. 43 women in white giz on a gymnasium floor. 12 fellows on a rooftop in Lagos with plantain chips and hard questions. A girl in Atlanta with the Notes app open. A professor who said she was one of the most genuinely curious students I've had in 20 years. 61 next to her name in the record books, quiet and permanent, needing no defense. And somewhere right now, on a track or in a library or in a field clinic in a city, most of the people in that comment section could not locate on a map. The work continues. That's the whole story. Or rather, that's where the story is so far. The rest of it is still being run. If this one moved you, and I think it might have taken a second before you scroll, think about who in your life is doing the work that nobody sees. The person carrying 2 things at once when everyone around them is only carrying 1. The person who is excellent in ways that don't fit the story other people have told about them. Tell them you see it. Tell them it matters. Because the Jordans of the world are watching more than we realize, and they need to know that someone is paying attention. Drop in the comments the name of a black woman who changed something for you, a teacher, a coach, a family member, a stranger on the internet at 0 inches the morning. I'll read every one of them. And subscribe if you aren't already, because the next story in this series is about a man who was told he was too old, too slow, and too broken to compete at the highest level. And what he did about it is one of the most quietly extraordinary things I've ever researched. Don't miss it.